I think in the first year or two, we had about 100 million products that we were donating annually on behalf of our third-party sellers.
Have you ever wondered what happens to all the returns at Amazon? Well, my guest today, Michael Friedman, helped build Amazon's donations and liquidations programs, keeping millions of products out of landfills, an impact that rippled throughout the company and the industry. Welcome to Any Job Can Be a Climate Job, the podcast where we explore how people are taking climate action from within their companies. I'm Louisa Henry, and in this episode, we'll dive into how Michael made the change at Amazon, how he aligned business goals with leadership, with values, with environmental responsibility, and how anyone, yes, you included, can make your job a climate job. So let's dive into it. Hey, Michael.
Hey, Louisa, great to meet you.
Good to meet you too.
Firstly, thanks for having me on. Really excited to talk to you and anyone who's listening. And I really would say, actually, I never really transitioned into sustainability. I think it's really been a part of my career, really from the onset, starting with my education. But yeah, let me give you a little overview of how I got to where I am and how sustainability played a part in that journey. And it really starts back really with my childhood and growing up. I had a family that really put travel first, and I was very fortunate to see parts of the world and really appreciate what we had done as a society. But I've also seen what we've done to really impact it negatively as well. So I think I had this innate sense of impact and sustainability just in my heart from a young age. And then going to college, I studied chemistry with a focus on environmental studies. And I was able to take graduate degree courses as an undergrad and really get a sense of what were some of the biggest challenges of our time. And so with that in mind, I actually, coming out of college, had found a job working in finance in New York City. And funny enough, that was right after kind of the 08, 09 recession. And I had my first version of a layoff. My job was actually revoked before I even started. And so starting back at square one, I was really leaning into what am I actually passionate about? What do I want to work on? And I was able to leverage my network to land a role with the US Navy as a civilian. And I was working on our environmental quality team, which actually leveraged my degree, so I could feel good about that. And I was working as a chemist. So I spent 6 years with the US Navy on our environmental quality team, very technical at first, reducing cancer-causing chemicals on ships, reducing environmental dumping and sailor exposure impacts. So I felt good about the technical work. But from there, I was really more interested in building the business around the science than doing the science itself. And so I was able to transition into actually a financial management role within our environmental team. And fortunately, the government and DoD has a nice training budget I was able to leverage. I went back at night during this period, did a master's in environmental management. And then when I moved into the financial role, I did a master's in business at night as well. And so throughout my career, again, sustainability was just baked into these roles, which was great. And I quickly realized after the finance role, though, that I was excited about really a faster pace of innovation. And that's what brought me to Amazon. That was 2017. I moved from Washington, D.C. out to Seattle, where I am now. And I worked for Amazon. And we can get into more of the details in a second. But
Yeah.
Amazon, I was on our returns team and was able to do some really exciting sustainability work for them at scale across the globe.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I didn't realize how woven in sustainability has been in kind of your whole life journey. I want to back up a little bit more to so you were traveling as a kid. Let's start there. And you
Sure.
saw these amazing places, and you said you also saw where it was where we were kind of maybe hurting the planet a little bit. What kind of sticks out in your mind as some of those memories?
Yeah, I think you see deforestation as you're out in nature,
Mm.
and obviously there's ways to do that in a healthy manner, and there's ways that aren't. And I also spent a decent amount of time in the mountains, and you see a lot of mining, mountaintop mining. Again, there are healthy ways to do it, but in your head as a child, all you see is these are impacts that are happening. And so it just made me cognizant of the world around me, made me want to get more involved. And again, I didn't know what that necessarily looked like. And like I said, I was also possibly going into finance in my first career move. So my career was very non-linear, especially starting as a chemist and ending up now as a product manager building software. So I think you have to really just enjoy the ride a little bit and make sure you have whatever that North Star vision or goal is and try to stay true to it, figuring out with each step what what part of the needle are you moving forward? Is it skills? Is it an industry that you're trying to get into? Is it a network? There's various ways to move that needle, but just trying to stay true to your North Star has always been important to me.
Do you think you always knew what that North Star was, or is it now that you're kind of where you're at and reflecting back, you're able to see the thread line?
I think it's constantly evolving. And sometimes people learn by doing things that they enjoy. But for me, it's also been crossing off things that I don't enjoy or things that I don't want to do. And that shapes my next step. And so I'd say starting early on with the government, especially in the chemistry role, I knew that I was making an impact. I was reducing impact to environmental dumping and sailor exposure. And I felt just really good about that work. It got me excited every day to go to work. There were certainly times in my career when maybe I didn't have as much of a mission-driven sense, and I could sense that. But when you have those moments, maybe you're building skills, you're building networks, like I mentioned, and that can be equally important for the long term. And so, really, what I'd say is that North Star has been evolving the whole time. But I really have seen my personal purpose as leveraging technology to help build social community and reduce environmental impact. And actually, I was at a conference many years ago for Net Impact, and I had the president of Walmart sitting next to me at a round table, and he asked me that question, "What is your personal purpose?" And I was totally just left on my heels. I had no idea that was even a question someone could ask me. And so I had to go home and really think about that. And once I started trying to bring some of my own core principles together, that's what stood out is the being a tech enthusiast, but also leveraging tech, which is only growing by the day, to better social impact and environmental sustainability.
That's great. At least for me, I don't feel like I spent enough time in my career reflecting on that question, and it's such a great reminder to pause and to actually think about, like you said, like the things in your career up to this point that have really given you joy and made you feel impactful and excited, and the things you don't like, and just following those kind of gut feels can be really telling and help you find your way if you're kind of lost.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important to time box periods on your calendar, whether that's weekly, monthly, annually, and just reflect on how that year's going. Where do you want it to go next? And start planting seeds and trying to figure out some actionable steps to get to whatever that vision might be. Because that's how things happen. They're oftentimes gradual, but you need to make that time to actually figure out what that could look like.
What is net impact? Not all of us find ourselves sitting next to the CEO of Walmart. How did that happen? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, yeah. Net Impact is a national, maybe actually even international nonprofit organization that focuses on driving social and environmental change. And they have chapters throughout various cities and even universities. So, really fantastic organizations. When I was in my 20s, which feels like forever ago, I was living in the DC area and working for the US Navy, like I had mentioned. And I was really just in that day-to-day routine of going to work and coming back, but I knew that I wanted to expand my network, figure out what other opportunities were out there, and really learn, like, what were some of the challenges that we were facing from a sustainability perspective as a society. And I did a little bit of Googling, figured out a few organizations that were out there and started attending their events to figure out what they were about. And Net Impact was one of those organizations, and they were putting on amazing lectures from local and national organizations, networking events, also kind of like field trips, I'll almost call it, to local businesses to figure out how they were managing sustainability in their local communities. And so I just got a taste of what this organization was about and realized I loved the size of the community, the unique perspectives that were coming together, and I wanted to give back and be a part of it. And so I started just as a member, but eventually ended up joining the board and becoming the president of the DC chapter of Net Impact as well.
All right, so let's shift gears a little bit to your time at Amazon. You were on the returns and recommerce team. Can you share a little bit more about what that is? What part of Amazon is that? Give us some context.
Yeah, absolutely. So I moved from Washington, D.C. to Seattle in 2017 to take this job with Amazon. And I joined the returns and recommerce team, which is part of the retail side of the Amazon business. The other side might be AWS, which cloud computing. People have heard of that as well. But on the retail side, you can imagine it's logistics, it's e-commerce, and the returns and recommerce team was responsible for processing and managing any return from a customer, and then the second action taken on that item. You might resell it, you might throw it into a landfill even. So there's many options in between as well that we were exploring, but that was really the mission of this team. And I
Where was
started
the
out
team when you joined? Yeah, what did the team look like? Is it just starting
yeah,
out? Would it have been around for a long time?
great question. I joined at a very interesting precipice moment because they actually were two separate teams when I joined. And a few months after, they merged together. So historically, they were working with different leadership, different principles. And then coming together, there was a lot of change management trying to figure out how do you bring together maybe two different team cultures under one umbrella, under one set of leadership principles. And so I give my management a lot of credit for doing that successfully and bringing people under a really strong North Star. And so I want to just expand on that a little bit, which was this new North Star was something that we called the 4 zeros. And so for us, it was we wanted zero cost of returns, which meant like, how could we actually make returns profitable instead of a cost center? And that might be through resale. How can we make zero defects? So again, reducing errors throughout our processing. How can we have zero product waste? So ensuring that we were putting as little inventory into a landfill as possible. And then lastly, zero product emissions. And we had adopted a new team recently that was focused on carbon emissions as well. So all of that just made it a very exciting team to be on. It was very fortuitous that I joined right before this merger of teams. And again, sustainability was somewhat baked into the roles that I had while I was on the team.
Okay, can we dive into those 4 zeros a little bit more?
Sure,
So,
sure.
the first one, you said was, 0 say it again.
Cost of returns.
0 cost of returns. Okay, so this one you had mentioned you take a return and instead of maybe throwing it in the landfill, you're excuse me, finding opportunities to resell it.
Exactly. So historically, if you just think about the returns process, it's a cost center. Everything you're doing is hurting the bottom line because you have labor going into that process. That might be receiving an item back at a warehouse, opening it, looking at it, deciding what to do with it next. And if you weren't making any profit off of that, you might be just sending it to a landfill or even returning it to a third party seller. All of that comes with a cost. And so if you can offset that cost by reselling it, you can try and get closer and closer to this concept of zero cost of returns.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, that makes
Yep.
sense.
Yep, and that'll play
And
into one of the products that I was the single-threaded owner on, which was an ability for sellers to liquidate that inventory and generate revenue on it. But we can chat about that in a few minutes. But that was our first zero, was zero cost of returns. The second one was zero defects. That's a little more overarching Amazon principle of just how do we reduce the number of errors in a process and set up proper mechanisms so that we don't repeat the same error twice. So always very focused on defect elimination.
okay, so that's not necessarily defects in the product or setting expectations before a customer, like, hits buy so that there is less likely of a chance of return, but you're talking more like
Exactly.
is that included in that?
It wasn't with product manufacturing or product defects. It was more about defects throughout the process. You can imagine how complex returns might be. When you think about outbound shipping, it's
Yeah.
actually fairly straightforward. I know people might criticize me for that, but you click a button that you want to buy a new pair of shoes. Those shoes are in a warehouse. We put them in a box quickly and ship them to you. But when you think about returns, everything's getting returned for a variety of reasons. It could be that a customer just didn't want it. You also might just have a customer who's possibly not telling you the truth because they're ashamed or embarrassed. So you're really trying to understand what those reasons are and figure out what to do with it next. And that requires, um, a less standardized process that you're trying to include standardization into. But that then introduces a little bit more subjectivity into the matter, especially as you have some of our associates in warehouses who are trying to understand what might be wrong with this return.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I never really thought the shipping process from Amazon would be straightforward, but I guess compared to returns, I could see how that would be straightforward.
Yeah, I think if you can handle the returns process, you can handle most things in life.
Yeah, yeah, wow. Can you give us a sense of, like, quantity at all, or throughput?
Oh, it's been a while now, so I don't know that I have any numbers, and I'm not even sure that I could share any numbers to be honest with you. So yeah, maybe I'll avoid that one. Go ahead.
Did you visit any of these warehouses?
Oh yeah, it's a fascinating operation. So let me give you a little overview of the time at Amazon. So 6 years, whole time was on the returns and recommerce team. And I spent my first 2 years actually as a program manager on associated with launching new warehouses where we specifically evaluated returned products. So I went to plenty of warehouses to understand what those operations looked like, really understand where there were some inefficiencies and where we could improve it, and then help build out new facilities around the country that were maybe a little closer to population densities so that there was less transportation costs associated with that return. So after 2 years there, I then jumped into product management for 4 years. And to give maybe the audience a little understanding of the difference, at least in my perspective, as a program manager, I was improving processes, standing up new initiatives, and reducing defects. As a product manager, I was really building out a vision and roadmap that I would then work with software engineers on to actually build out new software services. And Amazon's quite unique because there's a hardware component to it. Hardware here being a lot of the logistics and physical operations that happened in these warehouses.
Right, right. Okay. All right, then the third zero, let's move to that one.
Yeah, keep us moving here. So then the third one was product waste, which is really near and dear to my heart. And essentially that meant that we wanted to reduce the amount of inventory we were putting into a landfill. And so let me give a little context here because I think it's helpful to understand how Amazon got to where it is. When it launched back in the 90s, everything that Amazon sold was owned by Amazon. And that meant Amazon had pretty good control of what that product was and what they wanted to do with it. If you fast forward to today, 60 to 70% of all sales on Amazon are made by third-party sellers. So we created this marketplace, which made perfect sense and has driven this positive flywheel. But now we also need to start understanding what are the pain points of these third-party sellers and what types of services do we need to offer so that they have a very positive experience and continue to stay within the Amazon ecosystem. And
60 to 70% are
yeah,
third-party sellers of the products we buy.
exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. And when I came into this product management role, really the problem statement that I was faced with was we do not have the proper uh, products for our third party sellers to manage their overstock and returned inventory. Essentially, if you were a seller on Amazon back in 2017, Amazon would either send your inventory back to you if it's
Mhm.
overstock and returned, or for the most part, it was throwing this inventory into landfill on your behalf at your that was a selection by the third party seller. And so you can imagine these are tough, tough options, and you would like to think there was a better alternative. And that's when I came in to help build out a liquidations business for these third party sellers. So essentially creating a two-sided marketplace where you as a seller could then decide to liquidate your item to a downstream buyer. You might make 10 cents on the dollar, but you're making something rather than nothing. Amazon would take a cut of that, and that product would be reused by a downstream customer instead of going into a landfill. So it really was this people, planet, profit triple win, which again got me excited every morning to come into work and help build out this new initiative that was going to scale worldwide.
Yeah. That's pretty neat. Who are these downstream buyers? Are these more Amazon customers who wanna buy a returned product, or is it a new buyer in a bulk buyer somewhere?
Yeah, yeah, great question as well. And that answer has actually evolved with time. But historically, and again, 2017 is when the program launched, we were using just a handful of wholesale liquidators. And so these might be known entities that buy in bulk. They might take a whole pallet or even, Connex box of liquidated items and flip them or sell them to bargain bin stores that maybe you've seen before. Could end up in a TJ Maxx or a Ross. Really, kind of the possibilities are endless what they might do with them. If you really want to have a good time, I'd recommend going on YouTube and typing in Amazon liquidations and seeing how excited people get when they have the ability to get their hands on some Amazon liquidated products, because they usually are still decent quality and have some high turnover volume.
Yeah, yeah, I bet. Okay, great. And, you mentioned there are people, planet, profit. Can you where does that come from? I had another guest who also mentioned that in her line of work, and I'm curious, if this is a common phrase.
Yeah, I don't know where it came from, but I've certainly heard it since I was, God, probably a decade ago. It may
Uh-huh.
have come up during my master's program, but it always just resonated with me of how can we balance those three pillars rather than just the bottom line, or even now we might call it the triple bottom line if we're accounting for these three pillars. And I think it's incredibly important that organizations, if they want to have this type of impact, really bake it into some of their core foundational principles, because otherwise it might get lost in the mix if you're only focusing on top or bottom line revenue and profit. And so I think having that baked into your North Star vision, like we did on the returns team with this zero product waste concept, made it a lot easier to make tough trade-off prioritization decisions, especially when you're not always comparing apples to apples. And I'm happy to dive into that. But when we wanted to launch a new, let's call it donations feature, another product that I had helped launch, you weren't always making money on donated products. So how do you convince your leadership team that we want to invest in something like a donations feature that wasn't going to have an immediate revenue or profit ROI? It was more for the greater good of the environment, or for goodwill in marketing and PR.
Yeah, let's definitely get into that. Yeah, tell us more. So this is my guess is you're returning something from Amazon, and there's an opportunity to donate it to an organization or people. Tell me more.
Exactly. So really with the thread that I just talked about, as a seller, you have returned inventory, or maybe even overstock inventory. And historically, you had the two options: returning it to yourself or having it go in a landfill. I helped build out the liquidations business, and then I helped manage the donations business as well. And that essentially gave you two new options. You could liquidate that inventory, or you could donate that inventory to a charity. And we worked with a really awesome charity broker in the country called Good 360 that would receive donated inventory from each of the warehouses we have around the country, and then work within their own networks to identify the charities that should receive that type of inventory to provide out to their communities. And so really exciting. I think in the first year or two, we had about 100 million products that we were donating annually on behalf of our third-party sellers. So
Wow.
you could really see the impact there. And I was able to help launch it globally to various other marketplaces. And that's just really a testament to what you can do at scale when you have something like Amazon behind you.
And so, how did you get Amazon to sign off on this if they're looking at optimizing every part of their business, I would imagine, for profit or efficiency?
It's definitely a challenge. And I think I was working with a lot of incredibly talented and smart people. So I wasn't necessarily the one who launched it from inception, which I did for liquidations, but I did take it over and manage it as I scaled it. And I think you really have to understand what are the goals of an organization, and also what are the motivations of leadership and others around you. And so we again had some really strong North Star visions of reducing product waste, but we also recognized the scrutiny that Amazon was coming under for various practices and the amount of e-commerce waste that was coming out of the business. And so while it might not always be tied directly to bottom line, there is something to be said about goodwill in a community, PR that you're generating. In addition to just the qualitative aspects of those, we felt good about the work that we were doing, diverting products from landfill. I think I think standing up the process in this new initiative for donations was really understood. I think the harder thing was, as it scaled, how do you continue to invest in this, especially when maybe you're changing a new feature that doesn't have any kind of positive ROI because you're not generating revenue. And so I think that as a product manager was always quite challenging to figure out, how am I going to compare building out maybe a new liquidations feature that would have X amount in generated revenue versus a new donations feature that wouldn't really have any revenue at all, but might just generate more goodwill and help improve the processes with the donations business. And so I think that's where roadmap prioritization, especially in the product management space, is a little bit of an art and a science. And it's incredibly important to have really these tenets and leadership principles built into your organization, where you can talk about them without just only referring to the bottom line.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit. So typically, if you're prioritizing a product roadmap, you're looking at how many customers is this going to reach? How much revenue is it going to make us? How many customers are we going to retain from this effort? Or things that are really aligned to either customer metrics or business metrics. What were some of the axes that you were considering as you were prioritizing within this product at Amazon?
Yeah, and I'll talk about both the liquidations and donations business, because they are certainly related as part of the user experience as a third party seller, but they definitely have different metrics. I'd say what was underlying as a foundational metric that really helped balance kind of like an apples to apples comparison was trying to understand what would the impact be to diverting products from landfill. So we could certainly make some assumptions and financial forecast and product forecasts to figure out if we were to launch a new feature that maybe allowed more inventory to flow through one channel versus the other, here's what that diversion ratio would be. And we would have forecasts. We would do some A/B testing and small scale launches, and then we would continue to scale that product throughout a marketplace and even globally and track those KPIs throughout. So I think that was really our core KPI was looking at landfill diversion rates. But then as we got later into the business, you might recognize that a donations feature may only have KPIs that are associated with uh, number of users that it would reach, whereas our liquidations business would actually be generating revenue off of it. And so I think that's where it's a little bit more of an apples to oranges comparison, and that's where you have a little bit more of the art versus the science when it comes to prioritization. And so I think that's an important part of product management is that it's just not always quantified, and you do make some decisions without complete information as well. It's just a skill set that you end up developing.
Yeah, and that's where that alignment and with your leadership and really understanding their goals and the values of the organization can come in handy.
Totally. And then at least at Amazon, we had leadership principles that span the entire company. And that was great so that you would have a common language to communicate your own needs, other teams' needs, because you were constantly relying on other teams for building out new initiatives. But then even within a specific project, let's call it liquidations or donations, you would have a core set of tenets. And at least at Amazon, tenets are generally serving as a kind of a guiding set of principles that would help bring everyone into agreement around critical questions. And they were often, used to help solve tiebreakers when there were multiple options that needed to be considered. And so a lot of these core tenets were leveraged quite frequently for Amazon to figure out what direction to take on a new product or decision.
What's an example of one of these tenants?
Ooh, and it's a good question. Might be putting me on the spot on this one, but in general, the idea is not to really just regurgitate what the core or what the leadership principles were as a company, but it might create tension. And so let me give an example where I talk about tension for a second. When you look at the leadership principles across Amazon, you might have something like dive deep. So that's really getting into the data, understanding what's happening here. But then there also might be something like bias for action as another principle, move fast. And so those are somewhat contradictory. How can you move fast if you're diving deep? Um, Depending on the scenario, the product, one might be more important than the other. And so you could potentially have a tenant that speaks to that. And you could say that for this project, because of XYZ reasons, we will be we will be focused on bias for action over diving deep. We know that we need to maybe have this first mover advantage in a new industry, uh, and that might be the route that we take. I think something that's always been important at Amazon and generally I've tried to bake into my career is recognizing one versus two-way doors. Essentially, like what's a decision that's reversible versus irreversible, and trying to slow down at those one-way doors because you know that they're important. And so that, again, might be also something that you're considering when you're launching a new initiative.
That's a great point. And I think a lot of people wonder if big companies like Amazon truly care about sustainability, or you mentioned, a lot of it's goodwill and good PR. And I'm curious from your perspective, what is that balance between the business goals and genuine environmental responsibility?
Yeah, it's a tough question. And I obviously can't speak on behalf of any company, but from my perspective, like you mentioned, I think this answer differs not only between companies, but probably even within a company. And I say that because somewhere like Amazon, you might have hundreds of different small businesses running in different directions with different North Star visions, even if Amazon as a whole is trying to be Earth's most customer centric company.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the end of the day, it kind of comes back to what's the legal framework of the company? Are they a private company? Are they a public corporation? And when you think about a public company, really at the end of the day, they're responsible for generating shareholder value.
Okay.
And so I would say that it is much easier to drive sustainability related initiatives if you can tie them back to a positive ROI. And I know that sounds obvious, but I think it's critical and it's crucial. As I mentioned with some of our donations business lines that we had launched, that generated goodwill and PR. This is a little bit more of a looser ROI, sometimes more correlation than causation. I
Yeah.
sometimes in my head see that how marketing efforts aren't always causation based, but companies are still doing marketing as well. And so I think at the end of the day, it's just important to try and bake in sustainability initiatives into your North Star, like we did with the 4 zeros that I mentioned earlier. And that'll really help align your leadership team, align your projects to figure out this is a core aspect of the business that we want to focus on as we build it out.
Which of the 4 zeros did the donation program align to?
It's certainly focused on zero product waste as we were trying to divert inventory from landfill. I'd say that was our number one business.
And why would a third party seller decide to go with the donation business over the liquidation business?
That's a great question because you would think if I could make money off of this, why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
And I think you would be surprised actually how many sellers are excited about helping charities and downstream users and maybe aren't necessarily that excited about generating just a trivial amount of money on a small inventory. So I think it's really just what comes back to the excitement of our sellers to help their local communities as well.
Do you have a sense of the impact you made while you were at Amazon in both of these areas?
Yeah, I think at least from a donations business, by the time I left, we were donating about 100 million products a year to our charity partners around the world. And that was incredibly exciting. I imagine it's only grown drastically since then. And then from a liquidations business, I don't have the exact number of units, but it was a multi-$100 million annual revenue business, which was pretty wild just to see the scale of Amazon as well, knowing that you have just such a large force behind you.
Yeah, and I like that you were framing it in terms of diversions from landfills. Also, so trying to.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's wild to think how much was going into a landfill before these initiatives. And I really feel great about what we've done since. And I think even since I left, they built out a third service where sellers can actually have their returned products graded by Amazon and then sold as a used product for
Hmm.
possibly a higher amount of revenue than a liquidated inventory, which might be a little bit lower revenue.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't think we got to the fourth zero.
The fourth zero is zero carbon emissions. And this was a newer zero because we had just acquired a fourth team that was associated with more of carbon credits and accountability. And I will not try to act like I was an expert in this field because I was not. Yeah, I don't have as much to add on that one, but I'm happy to see that it was still a core zero for our team.
When you're saying our team, like, can you give us a sense of how big is this team?
Yeah, great question. I think we were around 200 to 300 total employees, at least in the corporate sense of it. So, that's a combination of product managers, program managers, software engineers, marketing teams. This isn't accounting for our associates that were working in our warehouses across the world. So, I think when you look at Seattle as a whole, which is Amazon's headquarters, it's fluctuated, but it's somewhere around 60,000 corporate employees and then over a million as you look worldwide.
Over a
Yeah.
million. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So quite some scale for sure. A lot of footprint.
All right. So on Amazon, is there a moment that you felt like a story or a moment that really sticks with you where you felt the tangible impact of your work?
Yeah, I think I was really fortunate in that Amazon prioritized really understanding your customer base and the processes associated with the initiatives you were building out. And so I spent a decent amount of time visiting facilities across the country, not only just our warehouses, but also our downstream users. So, as an example, with our donations business, I was able to visit a good 360 facility and really understand how they were receiving our products from Amazon and what they were doing with them to disperse them. And so, in going to one of these facilities and even meeting with some of the downstream community charities, I was able to see the products that they were excited about receiving, things that maybe you and I wouldn't necessarily think were exciting, but anything can be helpful, especially in a community in need. And really talking to some of these just end users and recognizing the impact that this initiative was happening on their day-to-day lives. I think once you start tying your office work to an actual user on, an actual community, it's really easy to get excited and wake up in the morning and wanting to continue to drive change.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think as product managers, we tend to be we kind of grow up in a world of always talk to your users, make sure you're getting really close to understanding their pain points and how the product and everything is impacting them and understand their lives. But I don't think a lot of roles emphasize that as much as product managers. And I do think it's a great opportunity for anybody, probably in any industry. I'm having a hard time thinking of an industry where it wouldn't be a good idea to go and talk to some of your end customers and understand how your product or your decisions are impacting them, especially if you're able to drive this systematic change like you're talking about at Amazon, where it's not just, for one off, it's all of these returns have this opportunity to get like a second life and seeing that downstream impact all the way down to the recipient of those second life goods.
Totally true. And I agree with you that really being customer centric can apply to any job functions, not just product management. And I think it's really easy for people to think that they are the average user of whatever product they might be working on. And you quickly go out and start talking with your users and realize that there are such a wide array of perspectives and really pull yourself out of the bias that you might be bringing to the table and try and understand not only what their pain points are and what they need you to build, but also what they don't even know that they need yet. And so starting to look around corners for them. And so I think that's one of the important parts of being a product manager and also driving new initiatives and change.
So after 6 years, you left Amazon and went to explore other opportunities. What led to that? What were you hoping to look for there?
Yeah, after 6 years, I really had checked all the boxes that I wanted at Amazon. Had helped build these new initiatives, had helped manage a team of other product managers. And I was excited to take these foundational skills and impacts that I made at scale and bring them to a smaller organization. I wanted to influence organizational change. I wanted to really get more 0 to 1 products off the ground. And I think another piece is that I just really cared about helping others in their careers and mentoring and coaching. And when I was at Amazon, I actually served as a bar raiser, which is a certified interviewer. So I went through extensive training to help moderate interview panels for other teams across the company. And I recognized how much I enjoyed that aspect of my job, which really was something I was doing off the side of my desk and, not actually getting paid additionally for. And so when I looked around in the Seattle network, because I wanted to be a part of a team locally if I could and have some in-person collaboration and have product management at a smaller scale, I found another company called Carrot, and they're the largest interviewing company in the world. And I was incredibly excited about coming into a Series C company, leveraging my skills, not both as product manager at scale, but also as a bar raiser, and help build out their second and third product lines to try and get candidates to find their dream jobs faster and also help clients in that same period as well. So that's what I was excited about in my next role. And again, I think you need to start having a little bit of a framework as what you're trying to optimize for anytime you make a career change. And for me, that was optimizing on industry size and a little bit of impact as well, focusing more on a specific individual finding their career.
Very cool. And what are you up to these days?
It's been an interesting nonlinear career as a whole, and that certainly hasn't stopped since I left Amazon. I, like many people, have felt the impacts of the tumultuous tech scene over the past 18 months. So, unfortunately, after a stint at Carrot, there was not much hiring going on as the tech industry took a downturn. And so I was faced with a layoff there. Joined another Series C company later that was more fitness focused. I've become a very big triathlete, cyclist. So was excited about, again, optimizing for a new industry and a new interest. And there was also a layoff there. So all that to say is a little bit of a challenge on that front. And sometimes it's necessary to step back and do a little bit of a reset and figure out what's getting you excited, what's driving you. And fortunately, I had the means to be able to step away from the corporate world for, let's call it, the past 6-ish months. And
And what does that ideal role or company look like in case anybody listening has opportunities?
I would certainly be happy to talk to anyone listening if they have any ideas. But I do feel like I've made some really great traction from a discovery perspective, figuring out what I want, and then also really making those connections and networking as well. And so for me, there's been 3 pillars that I'm leaning into. I'd say the first is looking for a company that's mission driven. That could be social, that could be environmental. I don't need it to be something so lofty like I'm saving all of the whales tomorrow, but I need to feel like I'm making a good impact in people's lives or helping small businesses in some sense. The second criteria is more function related, and I am currently staying with the product management function that I've been working in. I feel good about my ability to build software and marketplaces, but I also know that I get really excited about building out partnerships, working with clients, and being external facing. And so for me, I'm trying to find that nice blend of strategic product management that also brings in some more client relations. And then lastly, the third pillar is more about the in-person hybrid environment. And I do miss being on a team and working at least in a hybrid environment around a team for collaboration and culture. And I think I bring a lot of positivity to that. And I miss that camaraderie. And certainly, I think most of us have figured out how to work remotely and have gotten pretty good at it as the tools have developed as well. But at some point, it is nice to be around a team, and it's something that I strive for. So that's a little bit more of an optional third pillar, and that would limit me to companies in Seattle, which there are still plenty of. But yeah, those are the three pillars that I'm looking at in a next role.
So, for anybody listening who's inspired by your story, what is one small action they could take to create systematic change in their own jobs?
Yeah, I think this is an exciting question because it's so open and meaningful, systematic environmental change can look like anything. And so I think the first step here is a little bit of discovery and trying to figure out what are your goals and what do you want to accomplish? And that alone can be an overwhelming question. And so I'd say make sure you're not working alone. There's just so many resources out there to help you crowdsource ideas to figure out what type of impact you want to have. That might be an internal affinity group at a company. That might be an external organization like Net Impact that we talked about earlier, and make sure that you're using the tools and technology that are out there to help you figure out what that looks like. And I say that because I use ChatGPT as an example all the time to say, here's what I'm looking to do. What recommendations might you have? And let's help create an action plan to figure out tangible steps to get there. And so I think there's just so many tools that you can use today to help crowdsource what your goals might be and the steps you need to take to get there, that you shouldn't be working alone. That's often overwhelming. I don't do well working in a silo. I know most people don't. And just ensuring that you're carving out time box periods for this type of activity, because as we all know, we just get caught up with the day-to-day routine of work, personal life, and without setting aside enough time to do this, it just probably won't happen.
Yeah, yeah, great point. Yeah, working together, borrowing from ideas that are already out there. Hopefully, this podcast is inspiring and sharing some of those ideas. What about advice on starting some initiatives that balance that people, planet, profit framework that you were talking about? Any advice for pushback from leadership or trying to get things prioritized? I know we touched on it a little bit, but do you have any stories or examples to share there?
Yeah, I think there's nobody likes to answer it depends, but I think it depends a little bit on what type of industry you're in, what type of function you're in, the maturity of the company. And I say that because if you're starting maybe at a seed or series A company and you're getting in off the ground, you're responsible for setting the initial culture, setting the initial core values that that body is going to um, entail or contain the rest of its existence. So I think it's important to figure out again, where are you and what is the appetite for leadership or a team to enact this kind of people, planet, profit change. And so I'd start with that. Do you have core values at your company already? If so, do they reflect what you think they should? If not, try and have a conversation with your leadership team and get some candid and honest feedback. And then, like I was mentioning at Amazon, even if we had these overarching leadership principles, each initiative had its own set of core tenets. And I think those can really instill some additional people, planet, profit notion to help drive decisions, prioritizations. And so I'd say try and figure out what framework is right for the stage of company and work that you're working on. And I think that'll help drive this change.
Yeah, that's really great point. I've worked in a lot of startups, some that were had very clear and crisp values and a common framework and language that we worked through, and some that we felt we were just too busy to worry about that now. We'll do that later, and it never gets easier later. So,
Certainly.
bringing that in from the beginning can be really instrumental. And I liked your perspective too on if it doesn't really reflect the planet or sustainability in a way that you feel like it could. Have those conversations because things can be changed.
It's constantly evolving. And also at some point, you need to make some tough decisions. Like, are you in the right function? Are you in the right company? Are you in the right industry? It's obviously worth trying to make change where you are because sometimes that can be the easiest, but not always. And you need to figure out like what are your criteria for you to actually make change. Some kind of like gating mechanism to figure out at X point based on Y criteria. Maybe we need to make a change here.
Is there anything else you'd like to leave our listeners with, Michael? Any tips or advice? This has been wonderful.
Yeah, I think I'm just excited for the momentum that I'm seeing in the climate space. And what I would take away from a lot of the learning that I've done recently and networking sessions, webinars, you name it, is that people, I think, at times have a very set perspective of what a climate job means in their head. And climate can take so many different forms that I would say keep that idea open of what a climate job is. It doesn't necessarily mean you're, reducing weather patterns tomorrow or changing the global temperatures. It could just take so many different forms. So stay open, continue to network and expand your horizons on who you're talking to and what kind of concepts they're bringing to the table.
Great advice. Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much for being with us, listeners. I hope this was useful for you. Please do leave comments. We'd love to hear from you. And we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Louisa.
I loved this episode with Michael Friedman. I loved the story of how he built Amazon's donations and liquidations program, how it was half profitable for the company, but also half not at all donations-based, actually. Yet it was still supported by leadership. It was still aligned with the company values. It was aligned with the company goals and priorities. All of those points he touched on are absolutely key to making shifts like this. It's also a great reminder that small shifts inside a company can create ripple effects that have massive impact. If you found this episode inspiring, please do share it with a friend or a colleague. You never know who might be in a position to make an impact. And if you have a story about making your job a climate job, I'd love to hear from you. Send me an email at anyjobcanbeaclimatejob@gmail.com or connect with me on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.